The holding cell smelled like recycled air and broken dreams, which was fitting because Alina Vasquez had plenty of both. She sat on the magnetic bench, because apparently even furniture in space needed to show off, and watched through the translucent energy barrier as beings from a dozen different species shuffled past in various states of despair. A Taloxian with too many limbs gesticulated wildly at a bored security drone. Two Veridians argued in their clicking language about whose fault their predicament was. And Alina. She was mentally composing a strongly worded letter to the interstellar bureaucracy office that she'd never get to send. Lot 17, the automated voice announced in flat, universal standard. Human female, age 32, specialization in xenoanthropology. Opening bid, 400 credits. 400 credits. That's what 3 years of doctoral research and a spotless record amounted to when a corrupt station administrator decided your documentation was suspiciously expired. Never mind that she'd renewed everything 6 months ago. Never mind that she had the digital receipts. The Meridian's Edge station operated on a simple principle. Due process was for people who could afford lawyers, and lawyers cost more than Alina had made in her entire academic career. She heard the murmur of the auction crowd beyond the barrier. Couldn't see them, which was probably a mercy. Being sold to settle fabricated debts was humiliating enough without having to watch the bidders' faces. 450, someone said in accented standard. 500, another voice countered, this one melodic and strange. Alina leaned her head back against the cell wall and laughed, a short, bitter sound. Her mother had wanted her to become a dentist. Steady work, she'd said. Good money. No one sells dentists at space station auctions, Alina. Mom had a point as usual. Though in fairness, Mom had never specified that avoiding space station auctions was a criterion for career selection. 800 credits. The melodic voice again, firmer now. Alina tried to remember what she knew about bidder profiles. The auction house was required to vet buyers, some galactic regulation about preventing slavery, though the irony of preventing slavery at a debt auction seemed lost on the legislators. Whoever won her contract would technically be her employer for a period of indentured service. The duration depended on how quickly she could work off the debt, plus fees, plus interest, plus whatever creative mathematics the station administrator had invented. So 5 to 7 years, probably. 1,000 credits, final offer. That melodic voice carried an edge of finality that made the auctioneer's pause stretch for 3 long seconds. Sold to Procurement Officer Velmoth of the Catharian delegation. Catharian. Alina's academic brain kicked in despite the situation. She'd been studying the Catharians for 3 years through long-range observation and cultural database analysis. They were humanoid, almost disconcertingly so, bilateral symmetry, 2 arms, 2 legs, forward-facing eyes. The works. The only notable physical difference was their ears. Long, gracefully pointed, and apparently far more expressive than human ears had any right to be. She'd written 2 papers on Catharian ear-based communication that had been well received at the Xenolinguistics Conference on Titan. Of course, she'd written those papers assuming she'd never actually meet a Catharian in person. Academic research had a way of being far more comfortable than lived experience. The energy barrier dissolved with a whisper of displaced ions. A figure stepped into the cell, tall, elegant, with skin that held a faint luminescence in the artificial light. The ears were the first thing Alina noticed because of course they were. Elongated and tapering to delicate points, decorated with silver threading that seemed to be woven directly into the cartilage. The Catharian's ears angled forward slightly, a posture Alina's research suggested indicated focused attention mixed with mild curiosity. Dr. Vasquez, the Catharian said, the name rendered strange but recognizable through the melodic accent. I am Velmoth. You will accompany me to Ashendel. Alina stood, her legs wobbling slightly from sitting too long. Do I get any say in this, or is that extra? Velmoth's ears twitched, amusement if Alina remembered correctly. Humor. The cultural files mentioned this human tendency. You make light of uncomfortable situations. It's either that or cry, and crying shorts out the station's moisture recyclers. I'm trying to be considerate. Alina grabbed her single bag of possessions, mostly data chips and a change of clothes, and followed Velmoth into the corridor. The Catharian moved with fluid grace through the crowded station, and beings parted before them with the unconscious deference given to obvious authority. Alina hurried to keep pace, her human gait feeling clumsy by comparison. They passed viewport after viewport showing the star-studded darkness of space, the distant glow of Meridian's edge's parent star, the occasional glint of a passing ship. What exactly does a procurement officer procure? Alina asked, because if she was going to be indentured, she at least wanted to know what she'd been procured for. Specimens of interest. Velmoth didn't look back. Artifacts, cultural curiosities, items and individuals that might prove valuable to the royal court. So I'm a curiosity. That's somehow both better and worse than I imagined. They reached a docking bay where a Catharian vessel waited, all sweeping curves and bioluminescent panels that pulsed with soft light. The ship looked grown rather than built, organic in a way that made Alina's engineer friends back on Earth weep with envy. As they boarded, Alina caught sight of other beings in holding sections. A Metharian crystalline entity, something that looked like an ambulatory plant, and a small creature she couldn't identify that seemed to be made entirely of concerned squeaking. "Welcome to the collection," Alina muttered to herself. The journey to Ashendel took 3 days through a series of jump points that bent space in ways that made Alina's stomach question its life choices. She spent most of the time in a small but comfortable cabin, accessing the ship's cultural database to learn everything she could about where she was going. Catharian society was complex, built on layers of tradition and technology that had developed over millennia. They valued perfection, aesthetic beauty, and hierarchical order. Their government was a constitutional monarchy, with the queen holding significant power balanced by a council of noble houses. And the ears were everything. Length indicated genetic lineage. Decoration showed status and achievement. Position communicated emotion and intent. Alina watched hours of footage, learning to read the subtle language of cartilage and precious metal. When they finally emerged from the last jump point, Ashendel filled the viewport like a promise and a threat. The planet gleamed violet and silver, its cities visible even from orbit as networks of crystalline spires that caught the light of twin suns. Alina pressed her hand against the cool viewport glass and wondered what her mother would say if she could see this. Probably something about dentistry. The ship descended through atmosphere that shimmered with refracted light, past floating platforms where Catharians conducted business among the clouds, down toward a city that seemed to sing with technology Alina couldn't begin to understand. Buildings connected by bridges of light, gardens that defied gravity, and at the center, rising above everything else, the royal palace, a structure of impossible beauty that looked like frozen music. They landed on a private platform. Velmoth gestured for Alina to follow, and she stepped out into air that tasted of ozone and something floral she couldn't name. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard. The light felt different, casting double shadows from the twin suns. A delegation waited, Catharians in elaborate robes, their ears adorned with jewelry so complex it seemed to incorporate circuitry and gemstones in equal measure. They regarded Alina with expressions she couldn't quite read, though their ears angled in positions her research suggested ranged from mild interest to disdain. "The human specimen," one said, voice dripping with an amusement that needed no translation. Alina smiled her brightest, most professional smile. "Dr. Alina Vasquez, xenoanthropologist, pleasure to meet you. Quick question, do specimens get lunch breaks or is that also sold separately?" Several ears twitched. One Catharian made a sound that might have been a laugh, Velmoth's ears angled forward sharply. "She will be presented to the court. See that she is made presentable." And just like that, Alina was swept into the palace, through corridors that seemed to shift and breathe, past wonders she had no time to examine, toward a fate she couldn't predict. But she'd faced hostile peer review committees and grant denial boards. She'd survived 3 years on a research station where the coffee was technically classified as a biohazard. She could handle this. Probably. The quarters they assigned Alina were located in what she'd mentally dubbed the basement of broken dreams. Though technically the palace didn't have basements since the entire structure floated on some kind of gravitational manipulation field, she desperately wanted to study, but absolutely wasn't allowed near. Her room was small, functional, and came with a view of a service corridor where maintenance drones hummed past at regular intervals like the world's most boring parade. She'd been on Ashendel for 6 days now, and the routine had settled into something almost bearable. Wake up when the artificial lighting cycled to morning mode. Eat something from the food synthesizer that claimed to be nutritionally optimized for human biology, but tasted like cardboard had opinions. Attend to whatever menial tasks the palace staff assigned her. Try not to think about the fact that she'd been purchased like a particularly disappointing houseplant. The servants who worked the lower levels were Catharians with shorter ears, genetic markers of lower castes, according to the cultural database she'd been obsessively studying. They wore simple clothing without the elaborate jewelry of the nobility, and their ear decorations were minimal, perhaps a single silver hoop or a modest stud. Alina had tried befriending them with mixed results. Most regarded her with polite confusion, as if unsure what to make of a human who asked questions about their day, and made terrible jokes about the food synthesizer's creative interpretation of coffee. There was one servant, though, who seemed to find Alina's strangeness endearing rather than bewildering. His name was Tauren, and his ears were short even by lower caste standards, decorated with a single copper band. He worked in maintenance, keeping the palace's impossibly complex systems running, and he had the kind of dry humor that transcended species barriers. "You are doing it wrong," Tauren said, watching Alina struggle with the holographic interface that controlled her room's environmental settings. She'd been trying to lower the temperature for 10 minutes, but the interface kept interpreting her gestures as requests to change the lighting to various shades of purple. "In my defense," Alina said, waving her hands at the glowing symbols that danced mockingly in the air, "humans didn't evolve to operate technology that requires interpretive dance." Tauren's ears tilted in amusement. He reached out, made 3 precise gestures, and the temperature dropped 5 degrees. "There. You were asking it to compose poetry." "I was what?" "The interface is gesture-sensitive and context-aware. You must think about your intention while you move." He demonstrated, his long fingers tracing patterns that seemed almost musical. "See. Temperature, lighting, humidity, entertainment feeds. Different thought patterns, different gestures." Alina stared at the interface. "So your entire civilization operates on technology that reads minds." "Not minds. Intent. Emotional resonance. It is an old technology developed before we had standardized language." Tauren's ears angled thoughtfully. "Your people do not have this. Our technology mostly involves pushing buttons and yelling when it doesn't work." "That sounds simpler." "You'd think so, but we still manage to mess it up spectacularly." Tauren made that sound again, the Catharian equivalent of a chuckle, a soft harmonic note that came from somewhere in his chest. He was teaching her to read the palace's systems, bit by bit, probably against some regulation she didn't know about. In return, she told him about Earth, about oceans and mountains and the bewildering chaos of human civilization. He seemed particularly fascinated by the concept of rain. "Water just falls from the sky?" he asked, ears forward with interest. "Randomly." "Yep, sometimes it's inconvenient, sometimes it's beautiful, and sometimes it ruins your very expensive shoes. Your planet sounds disorganized." "You have no idea." Through Tauren and careful eavesdropping, Alina began piecing together the structure of Catharian society. The caste system was rigid but not cruel, at least, not overtly. Lower castes had different roles, different expectations, but they weren't mistreated. They simply existed in a different social sphere, one that rarely intersected with the nobility. Ear length was genetic, determined by bloodline, and while genetic modification technology existed, using it to alter caste markers was considered deeply taboo. The Queen, Sh. Lara, ruled with precision and calculated authority. She appeared occasionally on the palace's information feeds, her ears adorned with jewelry so intricate it seemed to be part neural interface, part art installation. The metal threaded through her cartilage glowed with soft light, connecting to, well, Alina wasn't sure what it connected to, but it looked important and probably cost more than her entire education. But it was the Queen's daughter who occupied Alina's curiosity like an intellectual itch she couldn't scratch. Princess Ra was a ghost in the palace. Servants spoke of her in hushed tones. Nobles mentioned her with reverence. But Alina had never seen her, not even in official feeds or palace announcements. The princess lived in the highest tower of the palace, a spire that rose above everything else like a crystalline finger pointing at the stars. Why doesn't anyone see her? Alina asked Tauren one evening as he repaired a malfunctioning gravity plate in her corridor. His ears flattened slightly, discomfort. The princess is sacred. She has been prepared since birth for a great purpose. Prepared how? Tauren's hands stilled on his tools. It is not my place to speak of such things. But you know something. His ears twitched in a pattern Alina was learning meant conflicted emotions. Everyone knows something. Rumors, whispers. They say her genetic code has been modified to perfection. They say she has never left the tower. They say she is the most beautiful Catharian ever born. He paused. They say many things. Alina filed that information away in the part of her brain, reserved for things that felt wrong, but she couldn't quite articulate why. A princess who never left her tower, modified to perfection, sacred and isolated. It sounded less like reverence and more like a very elegant cage. That night, Alina did something probably inadvisable. She hacked the palace's lower-level systems. Not hacked in the dramatic, illegal sense, but more in the poked around where she maybe shouldn't sense. The maintenance interfaces Tauren had shown her connected to broader networks, and those networks had information layers that weren't exactly locked so much as obscured behind assumptions that no one would look. Alina looked. The palace AI operated on quantum entanglement principles she barely grasped. Data existed in superposition until observed, which meant the system was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. But the maintenance logs were linear and concrete, records of where repairs had been made, which systems had been accessed, what resources had been allocated. The tower where Princess Lithara lived consumed enormous amounts of power. Environmental controls operating at precise tolerances, medical monitoring systems running constantly, educational interfaces active 20 hours a day, and security, layers upon layers of security that made the palace's other defenses look casual by comparison. Alina pulled up genetic modification records, buried deep in medical archives that should have been restricted, but apparently weren't, at least not to someone who'd figured out how to phrase queries as maintenance requests. The princess's modifications were extensive. Enhanced immune system, optimized neural pathways, improved muscular efficiency, even aesthetic adjustments to bone structure and pigmentation. The records went back to before her birth, genetic tailoring done in vitro. They'd engineered her to be perfect. Alina sat back from the holographic interface, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. This wasn't just selective breeding or genetic health screening. This was creation. The princess wasn't just sacred, she was a product, designed and refined like a piece of technology. What the hell are you doing to her? Alina whispered to the empty room. The interface chimed softly. A new file had appeared, one Alina hadn't requested. She opened it cautiously, half expecting security to burst through her door. It was a message, text only, written in perfect universal standard. You are curious about things you should not be curious about. This is either very brave or very stupid. Possibly both. If you genuinely wish to understand, access Terminal 7 in the garden level at midnight. Come alone. Tell no one. The message deleted itself 3 seconds after Alina finished reading it. She stared at the space where the words had been, her heart doing complicated acrobatics in her chest. This was obviously a trap, or a test, or possibly both. Every instinct screamed that accessing Terminal 7 at midnight was how people ended up spacing their academic careers along with their actual bodies. But she'd never been particularly good at listening to instinct when curiosity was involved. It was why she'd become a xenoanthropologist instead of a dentist. At 11:45, Alina made her way through corridors she'd mapped over the past 6 days, moving quietly past sleeping quarters and humming maintenance drones. The garden level was technically restricted to upper caste staff, but she'd learned which access points Torin used for repairs, and those routes didn't have active monitoring. The garden itself was impossible, a zero-gravity environment where plants from a dozen worlds floated in careful arrangements, their roots suspended in nutrient mist. Bioluminescent flowers provided soft light. The air smelled like growing things and ozone. Terminal 7 was tucked behind a cluster of earth ferns someone had apparently imported at great expense. Alina approached it carefully, half expecting armed guards to materialize from the foliage. Instead, the terminal activated on its own, displaying a single line of text. "You came. That is interesting." Alina typed, "Who are you?" "Someone who also asks questions she should not ask. The princess would like to speak with you." Alina's fingers hovered over the interface. "Why?" "Because you are the first person in 5 years to wonder whether her cage is beautiful enough to justify its existence. Terminal 17 in the East Archives. Tomorrow at dawn. Bring your doubt, leave your fear." The terminal went dark. Alina stood in the floating garden, surrounded by impossible beauty, and wondered what exactly she just agreed to. Dawn on Ashendel arrived in layers of violet and gold, the twin suns rising at slightly different angles to paint the sky in colors Alina's earth-trained eyes kept insisting were impossible. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through scenarios that ranged from awkward misunderstanding to ceremonial execution for nosiness. The smart play would have been to ignore the mysterious message, continue keeping her head down, and work off her indentured servitude in peace. Instead, she was sneaking through the East Wing like a particularly anxious burglar, trying to remember which corridors had active surveillance and which ones Torin had mentioned were on a maintenance cycle. The archives weren't what she expected. Instead of dusty rooms filled with ancient texts, because apparently her brain still defaulted to Earth libraries despite being on an alien planet, she found a vast chamber where holographic data streams flowed like luminous rivers through the air. Information moved in 3 dimensions, crystallizing into readable form when someone approached with the right neural signature. Alina watched the streams drift past, completely inaccessible to her very human, very unauthorized brain. Terminal 17 sat in an alcove near the eastern wall, partially hidden behind a cascade of financial records from 3 centuries ago. Alina approached it carefully, glancing around for any sign she was walking into something colossally stupid. The terminal activated with a soft chime. Text appeared. "Dr. Vasquez, punctual. That speaks well of your character or poorly of your survival instincts." Alina typed, "I'm a xenoanthropologist. Poor survival instincts are basically a job requirement. Humor as defense mechanism. Your psychological profile mentioned this tendency." "You have a psychological profile on me. That's either flattering or deeply concerning." "Both. I have psychological profiles on everyone in the palace. It helps pass the time." A pause then. "I am Lithera." Alina stared at the words, her hands hovering over the interface. The princess herself. Either this was legitimate or someone had an elaborate sense of humor about impersonating royalty. She typed, "How do I know you're really the princess and not, say, a very bored AI or a security officer testing my loyalty?" You do not. You must decide whether satisfying your curiosity is worth the risk of being wrong, is it? Alina considered this for approximately 3 seconds. Absolutely yes. Excellent. Then let us dispense with verification protocols and move to more interesting topics. Why were you examining my medical records? Direct, Alina appreciated that. She typed, "Because something about your situation felt wrong. A princess no one sees, modified since birth, kept in a tower. It read less like protection and more like imprisonment. Perceptive, most people accept the narrative they are given, sacred, protected, prepared for greatness. These are comfortable words that prevent uncomfortable questions. I'm professionally obligated to ask uncomfortable questions. It's literally in my job description, or at least it was before I got sold at auction. Yes, the bureaucratic misfortune that brought you here. I accessed the case files. The station administrator falsified your documentation to meet a quota. He has done this 17 times before. You were simply unlucky." Alina felt a surge of vindication that was immediately swallowed by anger. 17 times, and no one stopped him. Interstellar law is complicated. Enforcement is expensive. The victims are typically individuals without resources or powerful connections. It is an unfortunate reality of galactic civilization. That's a very diplomatic way of saying the system is broken. I have been trained in diplomacy since I could speak. It is useful for describing broken things in ways that do not offend the people who broke them. Alina laughed despite herself, a sound that echoed strangely in the vast archive chamber. She typed, "Your message said you wanted to speak with me. About what? Everything? Nothing. I have access to all human cultural databases, but databases are not conversations. I have studied your literature, your history, your philosophical traditions. I know that Shakespeare questioned the nature of power, that Asimov created ethical frameworks for artificial beings, that your species has spent millennia grappling with what it means to be human. But I have never spoken with an actual human about any of it. You're lonely." The terminal was silent for several seconds. Then, "That is reductive but not inaccurate. I am surrounded by attendants, monitored by security, educated by the finest AI tutors. I am never alone. And yet." Alina understood that, and yet in her bones. She'd spent 3 years on a research station, surrounded by colleagues, drowning in loneliness. Proximity wasn't the same as connection. She typed, "What do you want to talk about? Tell me about Earth, not the database version. The real version. What does rain feel like? The databases say it is precipitation consisting of liquid water droplets, but that explains nothing meaningful." Alina smiled. She spent the next 20 minutes trying to explain rain through a text interface to someone who had never experienced weather. It was harder than any academic paper she'd ever written. How did you describe the smell of petrichor to someone who lived in a controlled environment? How did you convey the particular misery of being caught in a downpour without an umbrella, or the strange peace of watching rain through a window? It sounds chaotic, Lithara wrote. It is. Earth is basically organized chaos held together by physics and luck. I think I would like that. Here everything is ordered, perfected. Even I am perfected, or so they tell me. My genes were selected for optimal immune response, neural efficiency, aesthetic appeal. I am the result of 10,000 careful calculations. That sounds exhausting. You cannot imagine. Do you know what it is like to be designed? Every aspect of yourself chosen by someone else. I did not select my eye color or my cognitive processing speed or the exact length of my ears. I am not a person who grew. I am a product that was made. Alina's chest tightened. She typed carefully. For what it's worth, I think that's bullshit. Yeah, maybe they picked your genes, but genes aren't personality. You chose to contact me. You chose to study human philosophy. You're making decisions right now. That's not a product, that's a person. My mother would disagree. She has plans for me. A political marriage to cement an alliance with the Vorthani Empire. I am to be presented in 6 months, at which point my preparation will be complete. The marriage will happen within a year. Do you want that? Want is an interesting concept. I have been taught that duty supersedes desire, that personal preference is secondary to political necessity. I have been prepared for this marriage my entire life. Whether I want it is immaterial. That's not an answer. Another long pause. No, I do not want it. I do not want to be given to strangers to secure trade agreements. I do not want to leave one tower for another. But what I want has never been relevant. Alina stared at the words, feeling a familiar anger building, the kind that came from seeing injustice wrapped in pretty language. She typed, "Has anyone ever asked you what you want? You just did, you are the first." Before Alina could respond, the terminal chimed urgently. New text appeared in red, "Security sweep approaching. You must leave. Same time tomorrow." Alina typed quickly, "Yes, and Lithara, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for asking uncomfortable questions. It is refreshing." The terminal went dark. Alina hurried out of the archives, her mind racing. She made it back to her quarters just as the morning shift of servants began their rounds. Tauren passed her in the corridor, his ears angling in concern. "You look like you have not slept," he said. "Insomnia, it's a human thing. We lie awake, contemplating our poor life choices. That sounds unpleasant. It has its moments." The day passed in a blur of mundane tasks. Alina helped sort dietary supplements in the medical bay, calibrated environmental sensors in the East Wing, and tried very hard not to think about a princess in a tower who had been engineered to perfection and given no choice about any of it. She kept remembering something her academic advisor had said. The most important question in xenoanthropology isn't, how are they different? It's, how are they the same? Suffering translates across species. That evening, Velmoth summoned her to an antechamber near the throne room. The procurement officer stood with several other Caitharians in elaborate dress, their ears adorned with jewelry that incorporated holographic elements, titles and honors displayed in light. "Dr. Vasquez," Velmoth said, ears angled in formal attention. "You are to be presented to Queen Sh. tomorrow. This is a great honor." Alina's stomach dropped. "Presented?" "Yes. You have been observed and deemed suitable for a particular task. The Queen will explain." Velmoth's ears shifted slightly, amusement, anticipation. "I suggest you rest well tonight. Tomorrow your purpose here will become clear." After Velmoth dismissed her, Alina returned to her quarters and sat very still, staring at nothing. A particular task. That sounded ominous in about 12 different ways. She thought about the mysterious message, about Lithara's isolation, about the Queen's plans for her daughter. She had a very bad feeling about where this was going. At midnight, unable to sleep, Alina accessed the terminal in her room. She didn't expect a response, but she typed anyway. "I've been summoned to meet your mother tomorrow. Any advice?" The response came immediately. "Yes, do not show fear. She respects strength, even in those she considers inferior. Also, her left ear twitches when she is lying. It is a small tell, but consistent. Thanks, that's either very helpful or completely useless. I'll find out which tomorrow. Dr. Vasquez, Alina. Whatever she asks of you, please remember that you have a choice. I know what it is like to be told you do not. Do not let them take that from you." Alina stared at those words for a long time before typing, "I'll remember, I promise." She didn't sleep that night. She watched the twin suns rise over impossible spires and wondered what exactly she'd promised, and whether she'd be able to keep it. The throne room operated on principles of intimidation through beauty, which Alina decided was very on-brand for Caitharian culture. Every surface seemed to catch and refract light in ways that made her depth perception questionable. The floor was some kind of crystalline composite that showed reflections of reflections, creating the disorienting sensation of standing on infinity. Above, the ceiling arced into shadows where bioluminescent patterns shifted like slow constellations. Queen Sh. sat on a throne that wasn't so much furniture as a statement about the nature of power. The metal, if it was metal, seemed to grow from the floor in organic curves, and the queen's circuitry-adorned ears interfaced directly with nodes in the armrests. Information probably flowed directly into her consciousness. Alina tried not to think about how many ways that could be weaponized. Velmoth stood to the queen's right, ears at formal attention. To her left were three nobles whose jewelry was so elaborate Alina couldn't tell where decoration ended and actual cybernetic enhancement began. One had holographic projections floating around her ears like tiny satellites. Another's ear adornments glowed with what looked like threat assessment readouts. The third had modified his ears to be even longer than genetics alone could account for, the cartilage reinforced with some kind of elegant scaffolding. Alina stood in the center of the room, acutely aware that her plain clothing and round, boring human ears made her look like someone who'd wandered into the wrong extremely fancy party. "Doctor Alina Vasquez," the queen said, her voice carrying that melodic quality Alina had learned was characteristic of upper-caste Catharians. "You have been studying our culture." It wasn't a question, but Alina answered anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty. Xenoanthropology is my field. Understanding other cultures is what I do." "And what have you learned about us?" Alina considered lying, decided against it, and went with carefully phrased truth. "That you value perfection and order. That your society is structured around genetic lineage and aesthetic achievement. That you've built a civilization of remarkable beauty." She paused. "And that sometimes beautiful things can be cages." Several ears twitched around the room. The queen's left ear angled slightly forward, interest, Alina thought, or possibly irritation. Hard to tell. "Philosophical," Sh. said. "Your psychological profile suggested you would be direct. I appreciate directness. It saves time." She made a gesture, and a holographic interface materialized in the air between them. "I have reviewed your academic work. Your papers on ear-based communication were competently researched, though you missed several subtleties that would only be apparent to someone with direct experience." "I'm happy to revise them if you'd like to provide notes," Alina said, then immediately wondered if offering the queen homework was some kind of diplomatic incident. Sh.'s ears tilted in what might have been amusement. "Perhaps. But that is not why you are here. I have a task that requires someone with your particular combination of skills and circumstances." Here it comes, Alina thought, the part where this gets weird. "I need you to educate my daughter." Alina blinked. Educate her in what? In the ways of other species. Their customs, their thinking patterns, their approaches to interaction. Lithara has been prepared since birth for a significant political role, but her preparation has been theoretical. She has studied data, analyzed cultural patterns, learned languages, but she has never spoken with anyone beyond her tutors and attendants. She has never been challenged by a perspective that does not already fit within her established framework. "With respect, Your Majesty, there are probably better teachers than someone who was recently sold at a debt auction. On the contrary, your circumstances make you ideal. You are not Catharian, so you carry no assumptions about what she should be. You are not politically connected, so you have no agenda beyond survival. And your academic background suggests you understand the importance of cultural context." The queen's ears shifted subtly. "You will have 3 days to prepare, then you will be granted access to the tower." Alina felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Just to clarify, you want me to talk with her? Teach her about human culture?" "Among other things." Sh. made another gesture, and the holographic interface changed, displaying what looked like a complex flowchart of social interactions. Catharian courtship involves bioresonance, the ability to sense emotional states through proximity. It is how we determine compatibility. My daughter will need to engage in these rituals with her future spouse, but she has never practiced them. The process can be overwhelming for those unprepared. The cold feeling intensified. I'm not sure I follow. I want you to attempt courtship protocols with Lithara. You will fail, of course. Humans lack the bioresonance capacity. But the attempt itself will teach her to guard her emotional state, to maintain composure when someone seeks to connect with her. Consider it a form of psychological inoculation. Alina stared at the queen. You want me to fake court your daughter, so she learns to defend herself against actual courtship? Essentially, yes. Alina searched for words that wouldn't get her thrown out an airlock. That's manipulative and kind of cruel. The throne room went very quiet. The noble's ears flattened in shock. Velmoth made a small sound that might have been a warning or a prayer. Even the bioluminescent patterns on the ceiling seemed to dim. Queen Lara's left ear twitched, just once, just barely. You find my parenting cruel? The queen's voice was dangerously soft. I find using someone as an emotional crash test dummy cruel, yes, your majesty. Alina added the honorific a beat too late, but she was committed now. You've engineered her to be perfect, isolated her for her entire life, and now you want me to essentially trick her into vulnerability so she learns not to trust people. That's not education, that's trauma with extra steps. One of the nobles stepped forward, his modified ears practically vibrating with outrage. You dare speak to the queen with such? Lara raised a hand. The noble fell silent immediately, though his ears remained rigidly upright in affront. You misunderstand, the queen said. I do not want you to trick her. I want you to prepare her for a reality she will face regardless of my wishes. My daughter will be married to the Vorthani prince. This is necessary for our alliance, for trade agreements that will sustain millions of Catharians. The Vorthani court is not gentle. Their courtship practices are aggressive, invasive. If Lithara arrives unprepared, she will be overwhelmed, possibly traumatized, to use your word. So instead, you'll traumatize her preventatively. I will give her tools to protect herself in a situation I cannot protect her from. The queen's ears angled downward slightly. Grief, Alina realized with surprise. Actual grief. Do you think I want this for her? Do you think any mother wants to give her child to strangers for political necessity? But I am not just a mother. I am a queen. And I must make choices that serve the greater good, even when those choices harm the people I love most. Alina felt her anger deflate slightly, replaced by something more complicated. She thought about Lithara's words. Whether I want it is immaterial. There has to be another way, Alina said. If there is, I have not found it in 23 years of searching. Lara's voice carried exhaustion that no amount of royal composure could hide. The alliance is necessary. The marriage will happen. The only variable I can control is how prepared my daughter is to face it. And if I refuse, then you will be mind-wiped and sent to the labor colonies, as I believe was explained to you. The queen's ears shifted back to formal neutrality. You have 3 days to decide. Use them wisely. Velmoth stepped forward, clearly intending to escort Alina out, but she held up a hand. One question, Your Majesty. Have you asked Lithara what she wants? Lara's ears flattened completely, pain, sharp and undeniable. Every day for the past 5 years. Every day she tells me she understands her duty. Every day I see her accept a future she does not want because I have taught her that duty matters more than desire. The queen stood, and suddenly she seemed less like an intimidating monarch and more like someone carrying an impossible weight. I am doing this because I love her, Dr. Vasquez. Whether you believe that is irrelevant. Alina was dismissed. She walked through the crystalline corridors in a daze, her mind churning. Back in her quarters, she slumped against the wall and laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed off the metal surfaces. So let me get this straight, she said to no one. I'm supposed to fake court an emotionally isolated princess to prepare her for a marriage she doesn't want, and if I refuse, I get my brain scrambled. This is what my academic career has come to. Mom was right. I should have been a dentist. That evening, she accessed the terminal and typed, "Your mother wants me to attempt K-Therian courtship protocols with you, as practice, for your real courtship, with someone else. This is the most awkward professional assignment I've ever received, and I once had to catalog mating displays for a species that communicated exclusively through interpretive flatulence." Lithara's response came quickly. "I know. I accessed the throne room recordings. I heard everything. I am sorry you have been put in this position. Are you okay with this, with any of this?" My preferences were determined to be immaterial approximately 23 years ago. That's not an answer. No, it is not, but it is the only answer I have. Alina sat with that for a long moment, then typed, "I have 3 days to decide. If I do this, if I go through with it, I want you to know it's not because I think your mother is right. It's because I think you deserve someone in this mess who sees you as a person, not a project. Even if that someone is a disgraced xenoanthropologist with questionable life choices. Thank you, that means more than you know. Also, I have no idea how K-Therian courtship works, and I'm definitely going to mess it up spectacularly. Just warning you now. I look forward to it. Spectacular failure sounds infinitely more interesting than perfect success." Alina smiled despite everything. She had 3 days. 3 days to figure out how to navigate the most ethically complicated situation of her career, or to find a way out that didn't involve brain wiping. She suspected she wasn't going to spend those 3 days sleeping. 3 days passed like a countdown to some event Alina couldn't quite name. She spent them researching K-Therian courtship rituals through every database she could access, most of which were maddeningly vague about the actual mechanics. Apparently, when your entire species could sense emotional resonance, you didn't need detailed instructions. It was like trying to learn to swim by reading about water. Torin found her in the archives on the 2nd day, surrounded by floating holographic texts she couldn't properly interact with because her human brain lacked the necessary resonance frequencies. "You look terrible," he said, ears tilted in concern. "I'm preparing for a task that's either going to be really educational or really catastrophic, possibly both simultaneously." Alina waved at the holograms. "Question. If I wanted to completely fail at K-Therian courtship in the most respectful way possible, how would I do that?" Torin's ears did something complicated that Alina interpreted as profound confusion. "That is perhaps the strangest question I have ever been asked. I contain multitudes of strangeness. It's a gift." He helped her anyway, explaining the basics with the patience of someone who'd accepted that humans were bewildering but generally well-intentioned. Courtship involved proximity, sustained eye contact, and the opening of emotional barriers, something K-Therians did instinctively, but that required conscious effort. The goal was to achieve resonance, a state where both participants could feel each other's emotional landscape. "But you cannot do this," Torin said. "Humans lack the bioelectric sensitivity." "I know, that's kind of the point." Alina didn't explain further, and Torin was polite enough not to push. On the morning of the 3rd day, Velmoth arrived at her quarters with an escort of guards whose ear jewelry glowed with active threat detection protocols. They looked like they could kill her in approximately 17 different ways, most of which would be elegant and efficient. "The Queen awaits your answer," Velmoth said. Alina stood, straightened her clothing, and tried to project confidence she absolutely didn't feel. "Tell Her Majesty I accept the task, on one condition." Velmoth's ears angled sharply. "You are not in a position to negotiate conditions." "Nevertheless, my condition is this. After I complete this task, whatever the outcome, Princess Ra gets a choice. One real choice about anything in her life. Her mother has to honor it, no matter what it is." "That is not possible." "Then I refuse. And you can explain to the Queen why her plan failed. Because she wouldn't give her daughter the one thing every sentient being deserves." Alina crossed her arms. "I'm serious, that's my price." Velmoth stared at her for a long moment, ears cycling through several positions Alina couldn't interpret. Finally, "I will convey your condition. Wait here." 20 minutes later, Velmoth returned. "The Queen agrees. One choice within reason. Do not make her regret this mercy." "I'll do my best not to." The tower was even more impressive from the inside. The guards led Alina up a spiral ramp that seemed to defy gravity, past walls that showed images from across the Catharian homeworld, cities, oceans, forests that glowed with their own light. Everything Lithara had never seen in person. They stopped at a door that was more art installation than architecture, metalwork flowing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The guards took positions on either side. One of them gestured, and the door dissolved into light. Alina stepped through into a space that took her breath away. The chamber was circular, surrounded by transparent walls that showed the sky in all directions. Gardens grew in impossible arrangements. Floating planters, vertical beds where flowers defied gravity, trees that seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously through some trick of spatial manipulation. In the center, sitting on a low bench near a fountain that sang in harmonics, was Princess Lithara. Alina had seen images in the databases, but they hadn't prepared her for the reality. Lithara was beautiful in a way that felt almost aggressive, every feature balanced with mathematical precision, skin luminous, hair falling in waves that caught light like captured starlight. But it was her ears that drew Alina's attention. Longer than any Catharian she'd seen, delicate and perfect, adorned with living vines that twisted through the cartilage, tiny flowers blooming along their length. The vines pulsed softly with bioluminescence, health monitors, Alina realized, constantly tracking every biological function. But Lithara's eyes were what made Alina forget to breathe. They held intelligence, yes, and the loneliness Alina had sensed through their text conversations, but also humor, warmth, and something fierce that no amount of genetic engineering could have designed. "Dr. Vasquez," Lithara said, standing with fluid grace. Her voice was like music, but there was laughter underneath. "You actually came. I was not entirely certain you would. I make questionable decisions with impressive consistency." Alina managed a smile. "Please call me Alina. Dr. Vasquez makes me feel like I should be prescribing medication." "Very well, Alina." Lithara's ears tilted forward, interest, pleasure. "And you must call me Lith. Princess makes me feel like a decorative object on a shelf." "Deal." Alina looked around the chamber at the impossible garden, at the sky visible in all directions. "This is beautiful. Also probably the nicest prison I've ever seen." "You said beautiful things can be cages to my mother. That was the moment I knew I wanted to meet you." Lith walked to the fountain, trailing her fingers through water that formed impossible spirals. "Everyone else sees this tower and thinks I am fortunate. You looked at it and saw what it actually is. I'm good at seeing uncomfortable truths. It's why I'm not invited to many parties." Lith laughed, a sound like crystal chimes but genuine. "I think we will get along well, for however long this lasts." They talked for hours. Alina told her about Earth, about oceans and mountains and the chaos of human civilization. Lith spoke about Catharian philosophy, about the weight of expectation, about spending 23 years learning everything except how to be free. They discussed Shakespeare and Asimov, debated the ethics of genetic modification, laughed about the absurdity of their situation. "So," Lith said eventually, as the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, "we should perhaps address why you are actually here. The courtship protocols my mother wishes you to attempt." Alina felt her stomach twist. "Right. About that, I want you to know I think this whole plan is ethically questionable at best." "I appreciate your honesty." Lith's ears angled thoughtfully. "But I understand my mother's reasoning. The Vorthani prince will attempt true courtship, true resonance. If I am unprepared for the sensation, it could be overwhelming, traumatic even. And you're okay with me being your practice dummy for emotional invasion." You cannot actually achieve resonance with me. You lack the capacity. So at worst, this will be awkward. At best, I will learn what the attempt feels like without the actual vulnerability. Lith smiled softly. Besides, I trust you. You are the first person who has asked what I want rather than telling me what I should want. That matters more than you know. Alina took a deep breath. Okay, but we're doing this with ground rules. You stop me the instant you're uncomfortable. And afterward, we never speak of it again unless you want to. Deal. Deal. They sat facing each other, close enough that Alina could see the tiny flowers blooming along Lith's ears, could smell something like jasmine and ozone. Lith explained the process. Sustained eye contact, controlled breathing, the conscious lowering of emotional barriers. For Catharians, this would create a feedback loop of shared feeling. For Alina, it would be a one-sided attempt that Lith would feel but not reciprocate. Ready? Alina asked, as I will ever be. Alina met Lith's eyes, violet deep containing universes, and tried to do what Torin had described. She focused on her own emotional state, on openness, on the strange affection she developed for this princess in a tower. She felt nothing, no resonance, no connection beyond normal human empathy, but Lith's eyes widened. Her ears trembled slightly. That is strange. I can feel you trying to reach out, but it stops at my awareness, like hearing someone call from very far away. Is it uncomfortable? No, it is gentle, curious. Like you are knocking on a door rather than breaking it down. Lith's expression shifted to something thoughtful. The Vorthani courtship will not be like this. Their protocols are aggressive, demanding. They will not knock. They will push. Then maybe you should learn to lock the door. They practiced for another hour. Alina attempting connection. Lith learning to maintain her emotional boundaries while someone tried to reach through them. It was strange, intimate in a way Alina hadn't expected, but not invasive, not cruel. Finally, as the light faded and the garden's bioluminescence began to glow, Lith pulled back. Thank you, she said softly. This was not what I expected. What did you expect? I do not know, but not kindness, not respect. Lith's ears angled downward slightly. In 3 months I will meet the Vorthani prince. The marriage will be arranged. And I will spend my life in another tower, serving another purpose I did not choose. Alina felt anger rise again, sharp and familiar. What if you didn't? I have no choice. Actually, you do. I negotiated a condition with your mother. You get one choice about anything, and she has to honor it. Lith stared at her. You did what? I figured if I'm going to be complicit in this mess, I might as well get you something out of it. Alina smiled. So, what do you choose? Lith was quiet for a long moment, her ears cycling through positions Alina couldn't read. Then, I want to see rain, real rain on Earth. I want to stand in it and understand what water falling from the sky means without databases or simulations. Before I am married, before I become whatever my mother and the Alliance need me to be, I want that one experience that is mine alone. Alina felt something break open in her chest. Then that's what we'll make happen. The next morning, Alina stood before Queen Sh-Lara and the assembled nobles in the throne room. They expected a report on the courtship protocols, on Lith's preparedness. Instead, Alina told them about the choice. Your daughter wants to visit Earth, Alina said. To experience rain, that's her choice, and according to our agreement you have to honor it. The nobles erupted in outrage. Security risks, impropriety, political complications. They threw objections like weapons. But Queen Sh-Lara raised a hand and silence fell. The Queen's left ear didn't twitch. No lie. If that is her choice, then I will honor it. 3 days on Earth with appropriate security. Dr. Vasquez will serve as guide. Sh-Lara's eyes met Alina's. You have given my daughter something I could not, the belief that her desires matter. I do not know if I should thank you or hate you for this. Most people feel both simultaneously. I'm used to it. 6 weeks later, Alina stood in a park in Seattle, watching dark clouds gather. Beside her, Lithara tilted her head back, her ears trembling with anticipation. When the first drops fell, Lith laughed pure, unguarded joy. "It is chaos," she said, water streaming down her face. "It is perfect." Alina smiled, getting soaked, thinking about how far she'd come from a holding cell on Meridian's edge. She'd been sold at auction, turned into a curiosity, asked to do something ethically complicated. But she'd also met someone who reminded her why she'd become a xenoanthropologist in the first place. Because connection mattered, because understanding mattered, because sometimes the most important thing you could do was ask what someone wanted and actually listen to the answer. Lith would still marry the Vorthani prince, still serve the Alliance, still spend her life in service to purposes larger than herself. But she'd have this, rain on her face, and the knowledge that at least once what she wanted had mattered. Sometimes that was enough, sometimes that was everything.